the kind of numerical simulations which you guys are doing are incredible. But of course, there's a lot of uncertainty for obvious reasons. And I think I made this point before, maybe that's why Ursula is smiling. But there is, the Boomerang Nebula, which provides you guys with an incredible test bed for testing out your numerical simulations and your theories. You have the total amount of matter ejected in a big spherical envelope. You have the time scale for that. You have a central large torus. You have the time scale for that. You have jets. You have the time scale for those. So you have an incredible amount of observational information. Why not try to simulate that specific object and see if it provides a constraint on the unanswered issues which you have for your simulations and your theories?
Is there a binary in the middle?
I'm sorry?
Is there a binary in the middle?
No, the binary merged. So the central star is now a merged star.
I don't want my theory to rule out your observation.
Right.
No.
Yeah,
So
how closely do we want to compare anything?
can you tell us about the boomerang? What is your, if you talk about the boomerang, what is the ratio of the total energy and mass in the jets or bipolar outflow to the rest of the mass and energy?
Most of the energy is in the spherical outflow, which is about 3 to 4,000 years old, and it's an incredible amount of mass there. So the RGB star was a massive RGB star, 4 solar mass or something at least. And the jets are presumably light. We haven't actually calculated the energy of the jet within the jets, but they don't have an incredible amount of energy in there.
So are they older or younger?
The jets are older. So the time scales are the envelope, which is now seen as the spherical wind, then the torus, and then the jets. That's the time scales which we have.
So the jets are
the lag?
I'm sorry?
What's the lag, the jet lag?
Yeah, so you can calculate the jet lag there, right? And the jets
But is it 100 years or?
No, it's in the order of 1,000 years something.
Oh, that's wait. So it's spherical envelope, torus, jet. I want to confirm that. So the jet, well, that certainly makes sense in terms of the usual order that we'd expect. Raghvendra, can you tell us the scale height of the torus, right? Is the torus, this goes back to our conversation with Guillermo, is the torus a fat torus that can do
It's a fat torus.
The fat
It's
torus.
a fat torus. Of course, we don't have, right now, we don't have enough angular resolution to see what happens in the center of the torus. We requested ALMA observations. We haven't gotten time to do this yet. There may be rotation. So with the limited spatial resolution, angular resolution we had, there's a hint of hint of rotation right in the center, but we need higher angular resolution observations to confirm that there's rotation going around right in the center of that torus. But if we interpret the line profile of the torus, which is very large torus, 1,000 AU or something, or 2,000 AU, it's expansion. And so that's how we get the time scale of the torus.
Ursula,
rotating. Yeah.
I feel this relates to our argument about cooling and such about, so at least you've got part of that torus that did not collapse down into a thin disk. So, yeah.
How much mass is in the torus?
I'll have to look at the paper. I don't remember. It's not a huge amount of mass. Most of the mass, as I said, is in the spherical outflow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we've had this discussion, like in simulations, we're just starting to touch on the issue of the pre-common envelope, whatever happens. We know there's Rösler overflow, there has to be. We know that it's going to be having a certain length of time before it gets unstable and into the fasting spiral. We don't know what that length of time might be. We love in analytical theory to say, well, either you're stable or you're unstable. If you're unstable, you're going to common envelope. If you're stable, you don't. But there's bound to be a whole range of in-between scenarios where something goes through a prolonged Rösler overflow with the whole shebang, with L2 outflows, L2 and L3, that will give you a disk, by the way, that will be bound, right, by rotating. And then if the, you know, if the star puts its mind to it, we'll go into unstable and then into common envelope, which will eject a blob at that point. And that torus may or may not survive the ejection of the blob, depends on where it is and how massive it is. And but this idea that there's this formation of a disk or torus is certainly there, and we see it, whether or not is what is, you know, the outcome after the common envelope looks like, I don't know. And there's one more thing that is interesting, is that in the Van Winkle objects, there is one thing that can be said. The companions are massive in our world, right? So they're 1 solar mass. They're not 0.5 solar masses like is typical for companions in common envelopes in planetary nebulae. They are, and what does that mean? At 1 solar mass companions, it means that the mass ratio at the time of common envelope was close to unity. That's stable mass transfer by the book. But of course, you got a blobby AGB star, which is not stable even if it's left alone. So you're likely to be in a regime of quasi-stability that goes still into some kind of strong interaction, which we may want to call common envelope or not. But so there's clearly something to do with that, with a range of parameter space at the edge of stability that gives us toruses and it gives us wider separations. And what it is, we're clearly not grasping it yet, but that class of object is telling us something. And I don't know whether, you know, the dusty post-RGB post-common envelope systems are just way too complicated in terms of,
I mean, the objects which Geeta talked about, those appear to be, those we don't have angular resolution to resolve them. The modeling indicates that they are these, what we are calling disks, but they're really the size and the flaring. I mean, they're like wide opening angles. They're like tori. They're not like, we're not talking about small disks there. So it seems that if you put the boomerang together with these objects, as we should, we have a lot of these systems. It's not, you know, so you should, in your theories and your simulations, I hope that you can make these kinds of systems where you have a ejection of a quasi-spherical envelope with a lot of matter in it, a lot of mass in it, and you have a torus as well. And presumably jets, but of course in the LMC systems, we don't have the observations to see whether they're jets or not as yet.
Jesus?
Yes, so this is a very naive question because I ignore most of these scenarios and the simulations, but this is addressed to Ursula because you described in your opening talk that there are several channels for this common envelope or the outcomes, so a merger and different types of channels. So which one is the dominant, and are we going to be able to tell if a system went through one or to another one? Do we know this?
Anybody wants to? Well, if you have a Van Winkle object, you've gone through one channel. If you have a PPN like Raghavendra's object, then you've gone through another. Maybe. Simple world.
I think that's he's bringing up, Jesus is bringing up a really interesting point, which I tried to make in my talk as well. It's just that this proliferation of channels, we still don't have, so I really liked what you did, Ursula, there. What we need, we still don't really have any, or it seems very difficult for us to understand what leads you into what channel. We have sort of like, broad ideas about initial masses, but that's about it. And it seems like, this sort of it's a great hindrance to us, but maybe we're finally getting to that point where we can really link, inputs to outputs. But we have so many different channels that what kind of degeneracies are we looking at when we think about the output of the nebular shape?
Maybe we should go backwards. Instead of trying to prove what these objects are, we should try to prove what they're not. At least we have some, if something is a merger, for instance, in the central stars of the PPN, well, if there were mergers, they're bound to be more massive. So they're not going to be 0.5, 0.6, they're going to be 0.7, 0.8, maybe. So can we exclude that to be the case? If the mass of those objects tends to be like in regular PN, then maybe they're not mergers. So can we just work in a way where we start excluding, like truly disproving hypotheses, as we should as scientists?
Right.
What do you mean by more massive? Which would be more massive? The central star of the planetary nebula or the AGB? Because if you have a merger of a 0.2, 0.3 solar mass main sequence with the core of an AGB, it will not be a real merger. The companion, main sequence companion, will be distracted around the core and will form a new envelope. So you can eject most of the common envelope, then destroy the companion, form another envelope. And then it will give you a long evolution time. And by that time, you disperse the original envelope, but you don't have a companion. So it is very complicated. But Raghvendra, I didn't understand the boomerang. The jets are outside the main shell or inside?
No, they're inside.
Inside. So if you had a merger, the jet was the swan song, the final outflow before the merger.
Well, you tell me. I mean, the jets were formed.
I can explain everything. You tell me and I explain.
The jets are the youngest things in the system.
Yeah.
So, presumably at some time during this common envelope phase, after most of the envelope was ejected,
okay,
the jet formation occurred. I mean, the formation of the torus and the accretion disk might have occurred simultaneously or simultaneously, but the formation of jets occurred at the end.
At the end, okay, before the merger.
But I don't know. I cannot time it to say that it was before the merger or after the merger.
We have some planetary nebulae where the jet follows the envelope, and we have some planetary nebulae where the jet precedes the envelope.
Right. So, that's the real difference for the difficulty for the jets, because it all depends on when the accretion disk that made the jet formed. And as we know, it could have formed just before the common envelope in Roche-Lobe overflow, or it could be the aftermath of the common envelope. So
I think both things happen. I mean, in preplanetary nebulae, you of course, they have, you see the jets all the time, right? So,
right.
So you have formed the jets before.
Do we see the jets in the Boomerang Nebula? Because what we see are cavities, maybe created by the jets of material which is being.
I mean, we are assuming that they're created by fast outflows, and in fact, there are optical observations showing that they're long slit spectroscopy ground based, which showed that there are fairly high velocities.
But those are not the velocities of the jet. This is the velocity of the material entrained by the jet, which is
so in the molecular thing we see of course you see you're right. But what I'm saying is that in optical observation you see higher velocity material. So presumably, they're like 100, 150 kilometers per second intrinsic jet material, which is then entrained and pushed out this molecular stuff.
Yeah, so models need to take into account all this. So it's not just the jet, but the effects. That
you can get the momentum from the momentum, but
yeah.
not the speed, intrinsic speed of the jets. You cannot get from the molecular stuff. It has to be, intrinsic speed of the jets has to be higher, of course.
Yeah.
So Martin, you refer to these parts as hollow parts?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, cavities. We could refer to those as cavities.
Yeah.
Right.
Why don't we see both jets? We would expect for a common envelope that there's jets beforehand, as from Joe's work. You should have jets form. You should have jets forming from accretion disks even out at 1 AU because of wind Roche-Lobe overflow, and then you get the Roche-Lobe overflow, and then you get common envelope, and then you get. I think so. Why don't we see examples of jets all the way through? We should have multiple jet episodes in the entire history of the binary evolution, all the way through common envelope evolution. Do we ever see anything like that?
I don't think we've ever seen distinct jets with kinematic ages that are different. I think the best to two jets is Martin's nebula, the 60, help me, Martin,
67, 78.
78, which has two pairs, but those seem to be just from Well, that is another mystery, but they seem to have different velocities, one much more attuned to white dwarf ejection and the other one to main sequence. And at first one thinks, well, you get accretion onto the central binary, but that's actually hard to explain. But that's an interesting system.
But we do see some bipolar structures, one inside the other. So maybe that is symbiotics. I don't know. So they're outside.
Yeah. But in principle, we should have a jet before common envelope and a jet after common envelope.
What is going to be powering the jet after the common envelope? So is there an accretion disk remaining there?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, it's certainly possible. I mean, you know, you look at the work that Jason Nordhaus was showing, where, you know, you can get, even from a planet, you can get an accretion disk around the center. And that, if that persists, yeah. Or just a collimated, go ahead, sorry, Ursula.
Yeah, just fall back of whatever's not been unbound. You don't need a lot. You just need a magnetic field too.
Mm-hmm. Which should be self-creating.
Can I change the discussion a little bit?
So I was thinking, I mean, I don't know how many people are actually tuned in at the moment, but and of course we try with this APM meetings to widen them to all massive and non-massive nebulae. But I think what tends to happen is that there still are the two communities that are interested in one or the other. But I do wonder what all this planetary nebula business, we have so many nebulae, they're so well quantified compared to, well, to massive nebulae, of which there are fewer. I think my internet is falling out a little bit.
Yes.
So what can the Eta Carina community or the LBV Nebula community learn from the connection between binary interactions and nebula in the low mass regime?
A lot, but they don't learn. This is the problem. Like in Eta Carina, if you remember, I don't know who was in the APN in La Palma before the volcano eruption, but then there was an argument whether Eta Carina is single or binary, and people in the massive community still were talking in 2003 or something like 2007, when was the La Palma meeting, about single star, while in planetary nebulae we killed the single star models. And the same goes, by the way, with supernova remnants. We have some supernova remnants that I showed you already in this meeting, similar to planetary nebulae, but supernova remnant is good images. We have 12, maybe 15. I mean, 1% of planetary nebulae is good images. And I think they can learn a lot, but not always they like to learn. But I think they can learn, yes. And Eta Carina, I think, is more similar to the post-AGB that avoided common envelope and to common envelope evolution. And I have a paper comparing the red rectangle to Eta Carina. It was a little bit forced because they are really different, but still there's some similarities. And yes, Ursula, you're right. I think the massive community can learn a lot, especially now that they're very much interested in forming black hole, neutron star binaries that go through the common envelope evolution. There's alternative or dynamical evolution, forget about it. But then talk about common envelope, I think they can learn a lot from this community, yes, definitely.
And are there ever two nebulae, whether across the mass divide or even in the same mass regime, that are very similar, but form in very different ways? So with all the various bits of physics that go into the formation of lobes and jets and tori, etc., do you ever get fooled by two things that look the same, but actually have a very different formation physics? Is it always the case that similar shapes just betray some kind of underlying similarity?
Well, you can get from, if you have dense torus and you blow a spherical wind, you can get bipolar structure. Like people talk in the galactic, say, this Fermi bubble, that maybe just for spherical outflow that runs into the galactic disk. but then you don't have precession. So both jets, stable, two opposite stable jets, and dense materials that collimate fast outflow can give you nice bipolar shape. But if you see something is precession, and we see in most planetary nebulae, we see precession, then it must be jets mechanism and not collimation. So it's very hard to come with two mechanisms that will give you the same shape. If you look on the fine details. Large scale structure maybe.
Totally agree. I mean, given the widespread presence of point symmetry in many different ways, you have to have jets. That doesn't rule out the confinement of a spherical wind by a torus. That of course will happen as well, but jets have to be there as well. But
like Vendra and I are in the same group of anonymous jet meeting. We both obsessed with jets. So.
I just want to raise a different question, which was brought up or which came up in my mind about missing mass. So where is the missing mass in the Van Winkle objects, which I call the disk prominent post-AGB objects? Because they have, there's very little nebulosity, but there's the disk, which is presumably rotation, but there's a small amount of mass there. So if these are post-AGB, the primary of this is a post-AGB object, where the hell did the mass go? I mean, it must have gone a long time ago for it not to be visible anymore.
Yes.
So what happened?
You can stall the evolution very effectively with a little bit of accretion. So these things are much older than they look.
Okay, so what you're saying is that they ejected, the mass which was ejected in the, whenever the envelope was ejected happened a long, long time ago, and they are now just stalled.
All we need is 50, 100,000 years ago for it to be gone, right?
Right. Yeah, okay.
All that's left is the disk thing. So there's just this disk that's been left and has been sort of making it look like a post-AGB object for much longer than it really is.
Also, how long ago we can live with?
So I mean, the PN becomes pretty faint in 50 to 100,000 years. But the thing that I don't understand is we calculated this. I can't remember. How long does the disk live? So we know the accretion rate of mass from the disk to the center. So we are bound to have a calculation for how long the disk lives. And so the disks are likely Keplerian, so they're long-lived. They're not expanding, but of course they still will wither away. They'll get rid of their mass, which accretes into the middle. We know that happens because we see the jets from the companions. But we need those disks to be resisting intact for as long as the object itself. So if the object is 100,000 years post-AGB, then we need to make sure those disks can live long enough to be still there.
Or so I thought that these objects didn't have jets, or most of them didn't have jets. It was just disks.
They do.
They do.
Most of them do. So they're amazing. So we had a student with Hans and Devika who looked at the jets. There's so many of them, and the jets are incredibly well characterized through tomography. They're coming always from the companion, which begs the question, well, the primary tends to be quite a poofy, 1050 our sun, post-AGB star. They're quite cool. The companion is a main sequence star, about 1 solar mass, and that's the one that's making the
guys, I'm sorry to interrupt, but next session is starting in 45 minutes. So
perfect.
I should say that it's very interesting discussion we have here, but we have to stop it now.
Okay.
So we can continue on Slack.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank
so
you
do
to
you want
all
to start,
speakers.
Martin?
Yeah, so let's clap all the speakers. And we'll reconvene in 45 minutes. Thank you very much, Ursula.